Good morning. Our opening words this morning are from Rosemary L. Bray, an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister and the author of 2 books, Martin Luther King, A Children's Biography, and a critically acclaimed memoir, Unafraid of the Dark. There are so many American stories, yet so many of us know only 1 or 2 versions. So many more of us think that our stories are mutually exclusive. The story of Native American people whose lands were wrested from them versus the story of white settlers who moved across the Great Plains. The story of African Americans cruelly separated from their native homes versus the story of Southern planters who used slave labor to build their wealth. The story of immigrants who fled their homelands for the sake of a distant promise versus those Americans whose families seemed always to be here. And there are the stories of those whose American history is nothing like the stories above. Stories of people who feel torn by what often seems like interests not their own. In the face of these divergent stories and complex identities, our ability to talk to each other and to listen to each other becomes crucial. With all the stresses of a postmodern world, many Americans believe the only choices are to paper over what seems dissonant about ourselves and our nation, or to see those differences and be destroyed. But more and more of us view this choice as a false one. There is another option open to all of us, to know ourselves more clearly, even if what we see doesn't always make sense. To acknowledge what is painful among us as a first step toward mutual reconciliation. To rejoice in the knowledge that our American dreams, though hardly achieved, are sometimes closer to fruition than we know. For parallel to the stories of injustice and persecution that are a real part of American history are the stories of justice and hope that continue to fuel a common love for and commitment to the American experiment. Today's service was planned by members of the Racial Justice Roundtable. Our group has been meeting for a little more than a year, and in the course of those meetings, we've often found that stories have bubbled up about experiencing and witnessing racial oppression, about so-called microaggressions, and about the lingering sense of moral injury with which they leave us. It takes courage to share those stories outside the safety of one's own in-group, whatever that may consist of. Often the stories white folks hear about racial injustice take place somewhere else, in the South, in some city, in some courtroom. Today we'll hear experiences from members of our own community, First Parish. Please recognize the courage of our members who do this. Recognize their generosity in sharing them, and accept the invitation of this service to try seeing the world as they live it.
As you are able, please stand for our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So be it. Again, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to you who are here for the very first time. There are blue connection cards in the pews, a way of staying in touch with what goes on here. Welcome to you who have been here nigh on forever. Welcome to those of you who were at last evening's concert with a conscience at Burlington's Temple Shalom Ameth. They had a wonderful concert, including our own Dean and Buffy Groves, and that was in part a benefit for our program of providing sanctuary for those facing imminent deportation. As you may have realized, we did have someone here in sanctuary this week, and he came to us after having been in conversation with us for some time. He spent the night along with 2 volunteers, and then the next morning his lawyer filed in federal court a stay of deportation, which was granted. And so he felt safe enough to return home. He was lucky and we were lucky, but let's give it up for our sanctuary program. It's a big undertaking, and we stand ready to welcome guests again in the future. Lots of things going on around here. There is a congregational meeting today at 11:45. We may have time for the briefest of after-service discussions, let's say right here in the sanctuary before that congregational meeting. That meeting is likely to be blessedly brief, but nonetheless, there are going to be some important updates, and if you're able to stay for that, that would be great. There are sandwiches available to tide you over. Next Sunday, as part of Veterans Day weekend, we will have a special guest speaker, Andrew Basevich. He has been with us once before. He is a career military person. He is a historian and authority on international relations, formerly with Boston University. He is remarkably sober, cogent, perceptive, and insightful. And it will be a remarkable time to hear Andrew Basevich next Sunday. He is also, along with other members of our congregation, a Gold Star parent. And so we do this in recognition of Veterans Day. In a couple of weeks, we are again going to be welcoming new members to First Parish, and our Ancient and Honorable Membership book is available for your signature. If you feel ready to call this place your spiritual home or one of your spiritual homes, we're ready for you. Megan and I can respond to questions, or as I said in the newsletter, we'll respond to questions, or perhaps you just need a pen, and we can provide that as well. This coming week, Thursday is Kristallnacht. We observe Kristallnacht along with the Bedford Jewish community and other members of the Bedford Interfaith Association. And we gather out on the front steps to remember the night of broken glass and to remind ourselves never to be silent in the face of oppression. And then also on Saturday is our annual auction. And the auction is a big deal, and please, please come. There is nothing more dispiriting than to come to an auction and not have very many people there. So come, even if you don't plan on purchasing anything. You know, after a glass of wine or two, maybe you'll change your mind. And so just come and have a go at it. Those, I believe, are our announcements for today. Welcome, everyone, and it's time for A Time for All Ages.
Hi, Blue.
Hi, Bonnie.
Oh, you don't sound too good. Is something the matter?
Well, I was just thinking about something that happened at school on Friday.
Oh? What happened?
Well, there's this new girl in my class, and I think some of the kids made her feel bad.
What do you mean?
Well, this new girl, Farhana, dresses in a different way than we do.
How?
She always wears long sleeves and pants or a long skirt, even when it's really hot out. And she wears this cloth around her head and neck, so we can't even see her hair.
Okay, what's the matter with that? Is there a clothing police or something?
Well, some kids were talking about it, saying it's weird how she never wears shorts. And one kid said that she must wear a cloth around her head because she has really gross hair, and all the other kids laughed about it.
Oh dear.
And when I looked over at Farhana, the look on her face was so sad. She asked the teacher if she could go to the bathroom and was gone for so long that the teacher had to go look for her. When she came back, she didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day.
That's awful. What did the kids do?
Nothing. I don't even think they realized that Farhana hurt them or that they had hurt her feelings.
What did you do?
Nothing. I didn't know what to do. She was such a nice girl, and I was so sad to see her so sad.
Well, let's think about this for a minute. Tell me what you know about Farhana.
Okay, let's see. She's really good at math. She finishes her papers before anyone else in the class, and then helps the other kids if the teacher says it's okay.
That's great. What else?
She always smiles and says good morning to the teacher. And when I accidentally dropped my folder and all of my papers went flying all over the place, she helped me pick them up.
Wow, that's so nice of her.
Yeah, so what if no one can see her hair? That's not what matters. She's a good kid, she's kind, and she helps others. That's what counts.
Right. Do you think you could explain that to the other kids?
I don't know, but I'm going to try. What they did wasn't right, but I think if I can explain to all those kids all the things I just told you, they might be able to see it my way. And then I think they wouldn't make another mistake like that again.
Oh, I hope so. But there's still one more thing. What about Farhana's feelings? Do you think you can make her feel better?
Well, it might not be easy, but I know when I'm feeling sad, it's nice to have someone do something to help me feel better.
Like what?
Like the time when I forgot my library book and I couldn't check out a book at a library time. My friend let me sit with him and read his book with him. We were having so much fun that I forgot all about feeling sad about not being able to check out a book of my own.
Oh, I get it. So what can you do?
Maybe I'll see if Farhana wants to read with me, or I could sit with her at lunch, or I could play with her at recess, or I could do all of those things.
Sounds like you've got some really good plans to work with.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I feel better knowing there's something I can do to help fix this situation, and maybe I can keep it from happening again. I am glad we had this talk, Bunny.
Me too, Blue.
Kids and teachers are going to go off to their ingathering and classes now. Onward.
Our reading this morning is from Crystal Valentine, who was the New York City Youth Poet Laureate in 2015. Today's service is built around stories, and Valentine's poem is a story, one that not only tells of events past, but also one that is itself an event that unfolds as we hear it. You can Google her name, Crystal Valentine, and watch her perform this poem, which is a story, on YouTube, live without notes. And I am not her, so I do hope that you watch her do it. I am a white woman, and I have not lived her life, and I hope in reading her incredibly exquisite words that you will see me only as a vehicle for hearing her story. Let's see. It's a story of grief and weariness over too many souls lost to walking, driving, living, and dying while black. And it's a story of despair over what about ism that too often meets the simple claim that Black lives matter. An answer to what about all lives? What about Black privilege? What about the race card? Like all poems, Valentine's trembles with intensity. Like the theme of our service, though, it does not command its listeners to see it my way. Rather, it invites us to try. Crystal Valentine's poem is called Black Privilege. Black privilege is the hung elephant swinging in the room. It's the memory of a slave ship praying for the Alzheimer's to kick in. Black privilege is me having already memorized my nephew's eulogy, my brother's eulogy, my father's eulogy, my unconceived child's eulogy. Black privilege is me thinking my sister's name safe from this list. Black privilege is me pretending to know Trayvon Martin on a first-name basis. It's me using a dead boy's name to win a poetry slam. It's me carrying a mouthful of other people's skeletons to use at my own convenience. Black privilege is the concrete that holds my breath better than my lungs do. Black privilege is always having to be the strong one, is having a crowbar for a spine, is fighting even when you have no more blood to give, even when you have lost sight of your bones, even when your mother prayed for you, even after they've prepared your body for the funeral. Black privilege is being so unique that not even God will look like you. Black privilege is still being the first person in line to meet him. Black privilege is having to have the same sense of humor as Jesus. Remember how he smiled on the cross? The same way Malcolm X laughed at his bullet. And there I go again, asserting my black privilege, using a dead man's name without his permission. I can feel his maggots congregating in my mouth. Black privilege is a myth, is a joke, is a punchline. It's that time a teacher asked a little boy what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said alive. Is the way she laughed and said, "There's no college for that." Ignorance is the only thing that won't discriminate against you, is the only thing that don't need a tombstone to learn your name. And it's tiring, for everything about my skin to be a metaphor, for everything black to be a pun intended, to be death intended. Black privilege is the applause at the end of this poem. Is me giving you a dead boy's body and you giving me a 10? Is me being okay with that? I tried writing a love poem the other day, but my fingers wouldn't move. My skin started to blister, like it didn't trust me anymore, like it thought I've forsaken it for something prettier, something smoother to wrap around my bones, like I was trading in my noose for a pearl necklace. Some days I'm afraid to look in the mirror for fear that a bullet George Zimmerman'd its way into my chest while I was asleep. The breath in my mouth is a weapon enough to scare a courtroom. I'll be lucky if I'm alive to make it to the stand. For some people, their trials live longer than they do. Black privilege is knowing that if I die, at least Al Sharpton will show up to my funeral. At least Al Sharpton will mason jar my mother's tears. Remind us that the only thing we are worthy of is our death. We are judged by the number of people it takes to carry our casket. Black privilege is me thinking that's enough, is me thinking this poem is enough. Black privilege is this. It is the breath in my lungs right now, is me standing right here with a crowd full of witnesses to my heartbeat.
I'm remembering several years ago when Al Sharpton spoke from this pulpit, and he said, we should all live lives of such worth that when we come to die, some poor preacher will not have to hallucinate a life. We are joining today with Unitarian Universalist congregations across the country in giving half of the undesignated portion of our offering to an organization called BLUU, B-L-U-U, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. This is called the Promise and the Practice of Our Faith for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. BLUU is a remarkable organization. There are far, far, far more Unitarian Universalists of color than we commonly imagine. And this is a particularly poignant time for us to support their efforts to organize and to enlarge their presence and their influence within our faith. The Unitarian Universalist Association Board has committed $5.3 million to Blue and begun with a gift of $1 million, and another generous family has offered another $1 million if we can raise matching funds. And so UU congregations are being encouraged to reach a threshold of $10 per member. Now, in our Bedford congregation, that would mean coming up with something like $4,000, and I'm not quite sure how we get from here to there. But I did make out a check today for my part for $500 toward this goal. And whatever you are able to do to be generous is most appreciated. Again, we are giving half of the undesignated offering to Blue. If you wish to designate a portion of your offering to Blue, that is also welcome. And as we say, freely we have received, freely give. For the good work of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will now gratefully be received.
Wow. I've only stood behind one of these once before, and I've spoken many medical schools and many colleges and universities, and nothing's as intimidating and as standing behind a pulpit, I assure you. Thank you, Megan. Thanks. I think. You've probably heard of Houston. Some of you know that I'm from Houston, Texas. You know, of course, about Harvey and the rain, the flooding. I hope you know that the Astros won the World Series. But I'm going to walk you through some of my life experience. I was born in Houston. I'm the oldest of four. If I had known that we were going to do these talks in alphabetical order, I would have introduced my maiden name as Portillo before Bowman, so I could have gone last. But here I am. I attended Lubbock Elementary School. And I mention Lubbock because I didn't know that there were a whole lot of white people on the planet. Because by the time that first elementary school built in that city, by the time I attended, there was one white kid in the entire school. Larry Jackson, I will never forget Larry Jackson. He was an incredibly brave little kid. It wasn't until I went to middle school at Jackson Middle School that I realized that there were white people a lot of white people on the planet. But at any rate, I want to take you from Lubbock, where I attended school until 5th grade, to Rusk Elementary School, where one of the things that I heard frequently mentioned was that I was different from the rest of the 40 kids in my 6th grade classroom. And I couldn't quite figure out why, but I was told that I was really, really smart compared to the rest of the kids in the class. They all looked like me, and I knew that Juan Rodriguez scored as well as I did on absolutely everything, except that he didn't speak English. And I was fortunate enough to have grown up with, in a family. We lived next door to my aunt. My tia Andrea had 4 kids. My father was the youngest in his family. He had 6 older sisters. So most of my cousins were considerably older than I was, and they were in high school or college, and they spoke English. So I grew up with both. My mom received a note one day that said that from the moment we got on the bus until we got off the school bus, we should speak English. My mom read the note and she thought this was a really, really good idea, but there was some additional wording at the bottom of the note, and she had my cousin Markel translate it for her. And the note indicated that the reason we should do that was because speaking Spanish would interfere with our learning. And my mom, who came to Houston when she married my father never attended school at all. My mother attended college in Mexico. She thought, well, that was the stupidest thing I ever heard. So from the moment you get off the bus until you get back on the bus, you're going to speak Spanish. Thank God for my mom. I don't know that there's a God, but at any rate, thank someone for the fact that my mother insisted that we speak Spanish. And I want to take you now to Austin High School, where out of 800 kids graduating by the time we were seniors, I knew all of the Latino students in spite of the fact that we were in a Latino and a Hispanic, a Chicano neighborhood. There were 5 of us out of 800 who were graduating from high school. And then I want to bring you to the college I attended, because until I was in graduate school, I had no African American or Latino professor. And this is Texas. A whole lot of Latinos live in Texas. A lot of people with a Hispanic background were there before anyone else came. And yet, I never saw someone like myself in a position of authority, or certainly not of knowledge. And that brings me to the medical school at the University of Texas and the medical school at the University of Massachusetts, where I sat on admissions committees and often heard comments about who should and should not be accepted into medical school that actually had nothing to do whether in fact that person might be successful. Oh, you know, she has a child. And my question was, well, who cares? And the response was, well, who will take care of her daughter while she's in medical school? I don't know. Her mother, her aunt, a neighbor? I don't know. But does that mean that that person shouldn't be accepted into our medical school? So that brings me now to the fact that I've been in Massachusetts on 2 different rather extended stays. Some of you who know me know that I've never worked anywhere for longer than 6 or 7 years. So I worked a lot of different places. I landed at Lowell High School as guidance director about 16 years ago. And one of my first tasks was to go over to the alternative school, the school where the kids who were not meeting with success in the high school were sent. And we were given a roster. The school was in a separate section of the high school. And out of 24 students in Lowell, Massachusetts, all but 4 were Hispanic. How does that happen? 3,800 kids, and there are 24 in the alternative school, and all but 4 are Hispanic boys, and no one asked a question. So here I am in Lowell, Massachusetts. I retired from Air Shirley Regional Public Schools a little while ago, and as now a retiree, I have a little bit of extra time, and I'm in a book club. And at this book club, we get together periodically and rarely actually talk about the book. We talk about a lot of other things, but at any rate, at one of our gatherings not long ago, one of the women in the group was describing some of her experiences as a professional and how often she was made to feel less than her colleagues or made to feel less than a boss. And she turned to me at one point in time and she asked me whether or not that had ever happened to me. And I hesitated before I answered. I wasn't sure whether or not I should tell her what my experience actually has been. But we were good friends and we try to be candid. And I said, folks have tried, but never succeeded. Because where I grew up and the people with whom I grew up made certain I knew that I was better than no one, but that no one was better than I.
Hello, everyone. So this is entitled, What Do You Expect? My parents brought me to New York City from India when I was 3 years old. Since they were both working, they started me at a preschool soon after I arrived, with me not yet knowing any English. At bath time, my parents were shocked when they'd find bruises all over my shins. I told them the other kids were kicking me. My parents promptly complained to the teachers at the preschool, but nothing changed. I can just imagine my parents' frustration at being in a new land and not being taken seriously. What do you expect? These people are not like our own. I can imagine them thinking. I imagine the children at the preschool asking my name and my staying silent. Them talking about toys or asking for a turn and my ignoring them because I didn't know what they were saying. They expected me to answer and took my silence as a sign of hostility. Kicking seemed the way to go. My mother tells me that she finally told me that I should kick the children back. Promptly, the teacher started complaining to my parents that I was kicking the other children. "What do you expect? These foreigners are not like us," I can imagine the teachers thinking. That sense of being an outsider, of being divided from the whole, is the hardest part of growing up different from the majority. Recently, during a class at the gym, I was reminded of this preschool experience. A lady walked into the class after it was more than halfway done. The instructor looked astonished at the audacity, or perhaps the cluelessness, of the woman for coming so late to her class. The sense of division was there immediately, the instructor showing with her body language that an intruder had come into the space. Sighing in exasperation to the in-crowd of her regular students, she told the lady pointedly that the class started a long time ago. The lady looked back with a blank look on her face and continued with setting up to participate. Sighing in annoyance, the instructor took the lady's silence to be a sign of hostility. Shaking her head to her favorite students, the instructor seemed to say with her eyes to them, "What do you expect?" With adult subtlety, she had just done the equivalent of a preschool kick, effectively dividing us from the outsider. After the class, the new lady asked me a question in very halting English. Since both of them were white, the instructor had expected a certain response, had expected a person who understood fluent English, someone who understood exercise classes and their etiquettes, and had not approached the stranger with a sense of curiosity or respect. Although I also find myself thinking, what do you expect when I think about some groups of people? I try to remind myself that that is a sure sign that I need to stop and think about what am I really expecting from them. Do I really know enough about them and their background and their motivations? I try to remind myself that perhaps I shouldn't expect and should instead try to bridge the divide. Not long after the kicking incident at preschool, I started asking my parents for candy from on top of our fridge to take with me to school. I would start handing it out to the other children as soon as I arrived. I felt surrounded by love again. I'm not sure what motivated my 3-year-old self to try generosity instead of more violence. My best guess is that I gravitated towards what I knew, since until then I had been surrounded by only love and generosity from my doting relatives and neighbors in my grandparents' village in India. Whatever the inspiration, that candy-giving act of generosity made all the difference. My parents tell me that preschool life went smoothly for me after that. Although I can't help going through life with the expectation of needing to defend myself, my hope is to bridge that divide, set aside all expectations more often, and give wholeheartedly to those different than myself.
Good morning. I grew up in Davenport, Iowa, in a predominantly white, middle-class neighborhood. I was raised by my white mother and stepfather. My biological father, who is African American, lived many miles away in California, and I only saw him a handful of days each year. I did not have much guidance, if any, as to what to expect as a child of color living in a very white community, so I had to figure it out myself. From a very young age, I had worries about my skin color. I could see how the way it was for me was not the way it was for my white friends. At age 8, I witnessed my 3rd grade teacher banish a black classmate to a corner of the classroom for the entire day because she said "library" instead of library. Watching that scene unfold, I felt horrified and scared. I told myself, you don't ever want that to be you. Keep your head down and your mouth shut, or you will end up in the corner like her. Later that same school year, my teacher set up a class project in the hall just outside our classroom. We took turns going into the hallway in pairs to paint the box. My best friend, Ellen, who was the teacher's favorite, chose me as her partner. As we painted, we got to giggling, and Ellen accidentally fell backward, causing her brush to make a brown streak across the yellow wall. I promised I wouldn't tell, but at lunchtime, when everyone went into the hallway to get their lunches, teacher saw the mark on the wall and made us go back to our seats. No one will go to lunch until I find out who made that mark. We all sat quietly until Ellen slowly raised her hand and confessed that it was her who had made the mark on the wall. Teacher remained quiet, and then she looked my way. "Of course you didn't do it, Ellen. You would never do such a thing. You are just covering for the person who really did this." I knew instantly what teacher was thinking. My heart raced and tears began to swell in my eyes, but Ellen swore that she had done it. We all sat in silence waiting to see what teacher would do. Finally, she said, "It's very nice of you, Ellen, to take the blame for someone else's poor behavior." And she let us go to lunch. I felt some relief at having narrowly escaped a nightmare, but I knew that it could easily have gone another way. 3 years later, I was not so lucky. I was 12, it was 6th grade, and it was math class. Math teacher was passing back our recent test papers, and when she got to my table, she stopped and glared at me. She slapped 2 papers down on the table, mine and my seat partner's, a neighbor boy named Ben. "How do you explain this?" she asked, pointing to the scores at the top of our paper. "They are exactly the same." "I didn't cheat," I said, my voice quivering with fear. "Ben," I said, pleading with him with my eyes, "please, please tell her what you did." And then it came, like a hard slap across my face, stinging the surface and penetrating deep into my soul. Math teacher screamed, "Shut up, you stupid nigger." Then math teacher walked back to the blackboard and began a new lesson. And I did my best to pay attention while feeling the heat of everyone's eyes on me. That evening, not long after I'd gone to bed, I heard the phone ring, and I listened to my mom get the news of what had happened to me from a friend's mom. As soon as she hung up the phone, I heard my mother let out a deep sigh, followed by heavy sobbing. I froze under my covers. I hadn't told her what had happened because I was too embarrassed, and I didn't know how to. And I thought that maybe not talking about it would make it go away faster. I heard my mother start to head for my room, but she didn't make it. The phone rang again, and again, and again, several more times that next hour, as the mothers of my friends called to find out if I was okay. Then just before she went to bed, my mother tiptoed into my room. I pretended to be asleep as she bent down, kissed the top of my head, and whispered, "I love you," before tiptoeing her way out again. The next morning, my mother and I went to the school early and waited outside for the principal to arrive. I don't remember if the principal apologized. What I remember is him explaining to me that my math teacher was going through a very difficult divorce, and she wasn't quite herself. He said he would call her down and she would apologize to me. No, my mother said. She embarrassed my daughter in front of the entire class, and she will apologize in front of the entire class. My mother and the principal went back and forth about this for a bit, but eventually my mother got her way. Math teacher delivered her apology to me quickly and unemotionally before the whole class, and that was that. Except that it wasn't, because it was a small school and everyone knew what had happened. And because math teacher was also my homeroom teacher and my science teacher. And I had to continue sitting through her classes and walking through the halls, forever branded as the girl who was called stupid nigger. I was nearly 13 when I went to junior high school and became the target of some bullies. But this time it was a group of African American girls who had gone to a different elementary school in another part of town with a larger population of black students. "Who do you think you are?" they'd asked. "You're nothing but an Oreo, black on the outside but white on the inside. You think you're better than us? Well, you're not. You keep acting that way and we'll kick your ass when you least expect it." I was constantly on alert. My mother, who worked full-time, made arrangements for me to get rides to and from school until the situation was de-escalated. Not by the school. It was my friend Liz, a white friend, who helped end the situation. She played soccer with the bullies and eventually convinced them to stop harassing me. Once I felt safe around them, I tried to make friends with those girls, but they made it very clear I wasn't their kind. In high school at age 15, I was called in to see my guidance counselor, a nice white man near retirement, because he wanted to discuss my schedule and his concerns that I should not take the advanced English class. He tried to convince me to switch into the standard 10th grade English class, but I was firm about taking the advanced class. He did not call me in at the end of the semester to congratulate me on getting an A. At 18, I was again called in to see the guidance counselor. He had reviewed my college applications and had only one concern. Why didn't you check the African American box on your Dartmouth application? I didn't check the box for race on any of my applications, I replied. I know, he said, but if you don't check African American, you won't get in. You won't. So if you want to go to Dartmouth, you need to check that box. I thought for a minute. I knew that what I wanted most was to compete for acceptance just as a student, not as a black student. I felt confident that my 4.0 GPA and carefully crafted responses to the essay question made me a good candidate. But in the end, I checked the box. And a few months later, I was accepted. Throughout my 4 years at Dartmouth, I regretted checking that box so many times. The academics were hard, and I struggled through many classes. Each time I hit a bump, I second-guessed my abilities. Maybe I was only there because I checked that box. Maybe I was only there because I filled a statistical need of the college. Perhaps if I hadn't been black, I never would have been accepted, just as my guidance counselor had suggested. Those thoughts ate at me for 4 long years, and even now, I'm still not sure I've worked out what I believe is true. In spite of all of this, I know that I was so fortunate. I once heard a black woman say, "I am my ancestors' wildest dream." She was right, and I know that I am part of that dream too, because I am the product of a legal, integrated marriage. I was educated in public schools, in integrated public schools, and then went off to an Ivy League college. I spent 8 years as a classroom teacher in predominantly white schools. But the dreams of my ancestors have still not been fully realized. Racial prejudice and inequality still exists, and not just in those faraway communities that you hear about in the news, sometimes even right here at home. It was about 3 or 4 years ago that I had an incident with a Bedford police officer. I was approaching the Loomis Street intersection of Great Road, headed in towards the center of town, at that time of day when traffic is backed up and moving slowly. I'd been inching my way toward the CVS stoplight and finally reached the point where I felt I could ease into the left lane to make the turn onto Loomis Street. As I recall the situation, I had just pulled into that left lane when a police car came at me head-on with blue lights flashing. I stopped, and the officer pulled around me, stopping with his driver's side window right next to mine. I rolled down my window and met his angry face. I don't know the exact words that were spoken, but I know that the officer was yelling and that I felt afraid. I was so afraid that I could hear the sound of my heart beating rapidly inside my head, and I could not hear the words he was shouting at me. I felt so nervous just to breathe. Then the fog began to lift, and I heard him say, "Answer me." "I'm sorry," I said. "What do the double yellow lines on the road mean?" I couldn't get past his angry eyes and the intensity of his words. This was not my first time being stopped by a police officer, but it was the first time that I'd had an interaction like this. "Don't cross," I finally squeaked out. "That's right," he said, looking straight into my eyes. "Don't cross them." I was not given a ticket. As I recall, I was not even asked for my license or registration. But with those words as a warning, I was allowed to go. So yes, I know that I am part of my ancestors' wildest dreams, but I also know that we are not done dreaming. Thank you.
Morning. Thank you, Raquel and Renu and Renee, for your courage and generosity and sharing your experiences with us. You have given us some insights into how painful and often long-lasting an othering experience can be. Unfortunately, it is easy to other someone through insensitivity or lack of awareness, or even as an unconscious behavior learned in a dominant, privileged culture. At this time, we would like to invite parishioners into a period of reflection. Have you had an experience of being othered because of your gender, race, ethnicity, or other differentiating characteristics? Have you observed an interaction in which someone else was othered? Can you recall a time when you recognized that you yourself, intentionally or not, may have caused another person to feel othered or diminished because of their intrinsic characteristics? What happened in that experience as you think back on it? What was it that was so excluding or diminishing or hurtful? And can you imagine another way the event could have unfolded that would have avoided that hurt or led to a more affirming outcome? Again, here are the questions. What happened? What made it so hurtful? What could have been different? I'm going to invite us now into a minute or two of silent introspection. Consider these questions and the experience that you've thought about. Thank you for sharing this time together in silent introspection. Thank you again for our fellow parishioners who have shared their experiences. We're also going to invite you at a later time today, during community hour or during our brief discussion, or at another time, that you might share the experience that you thought about with a friend or a family member or someone that you feel comfortable and feel inclined to share that experience with.
We're going to sing the third and fourth verses of the hymn, Wake Now My Senses, at number 298. And as we do, I'm asking the members of the Racial Justice Roundtable to array yourselves in front of the chancel as we unfurl our new Black Lives Matter banner. And we'll stay standing as you're able for these closing words and benediction.
Our closing words today are taken from Uprooting Racism: How White People Can Work for Social Justice by Paul Kivel. Assume racism is everywhere, every day. Just as economics influences everything we do, just as gender and gender politics influence everything we do, assume that racism is affecting your daily life. We assume this because it is true, and because one privilege of being white is the freedom to not deal with racism all the time. We are called to learn to see the effect that racism has. Notice who speaks, what is said, how things are done and described. Notice who isn't present when racist talk occurs. Notice code words for race and the implications of the policies, patterns, and comments that are being expressed. We already notice the skin color of everyone we meet. Now notice what difference it makes. Wake up.
This is our third banner. The first was twice vandalized. The second, hung somewhat higher, simply wore out. And so it is up to us to dedicate not so much this third banner, but to rededicate ourselves to the unfinished work of living its truth. We do as well bless this banner, and it is well that we remember what a blessing is. A blessing does not fix us or change the world. Like prayer, however, a blessing changes nothing, but a blessing can change us, and we can change everything. A blessing does not instill health or well-being or strength. Instead, a blessing reminds us of the truth that is already present within us. We know that all life matters. We also know that persistent, pernicious systems of white supremacy have deceived us into believing that some lives matter more than other lives, or that some lives simply do not matter. Our faith, the faith we know to be true, affirms that Black lives matter. This dedication of ourselves and this blessing of this banner is a way to remember our strength, to invoke our capacity to grow and heal and change, to resist giving up. May we be rededicated, and may this banner be blessed. And let us shout, Amen. Amen. And in quiet determination, let us also whisper, Amen. Somos el barco.
Somos el barco, somos el mar, yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you sail in me. The stream sings it to the river sings it to the sea sings it to the boat that carries you and me. Somos el barco, somos el mar. I sail in you, you sail in me. The boat we are sailing in was built by many hands, and the sea we are sailing on, it touches every land. Somos el barco, somos el mar. Yo navego en ti, tú navegas en mí. We are the boat, we are the sea. I sail in you, you sail in me. And with our hearts we chart the skipped a line. So with our hopes we set the sails and face the winds once more. And with our hearts we chart the waters never sailed before. Somos el barco, somos el mar.